Okay, so I thought I'd make a video describing a recent call out that I had for a BMS temperature low. Now, the error code 210 BMS temperature low is a deliberately implemented error code. It's there to actually provide users with a fault condition when their batteries are too cold. So if we look at the Fox version 2 app, when you click on device's battery, you'll see the temperature displayed just below the current power. So below the orange power level that the battery is providing or charging from, you'll see temperature. Now, on this app, on this screen, at the time of recording, that temperature is the coldest cell in your battery. So your battery is made up of dozens of cells. The coldest cell temperature is shown there at 14.1 at the time of recording towards mid-April. Now, there will be cells that will be a little bit warmer than that, but generally the pack within a few degrees of each other is pretty normal. Again, this is the data that's exposed to the end user. So we'll look into that. So why are we talking about the error code and the battery temperature? So if the battery temperature gets too low, typically it's low single figures, the battery will try to protect itself and it will stop charging and discharging. The exact temperature differs per battery model, environment that you've installed it in, indoors, outdoors. It also depends on the firmware that's installed on the battery as well as the inverter. But when it gets close to 0 or colder, sometimes I've seen 3, 4, 5 degrees cause an error code 210 BMS temp low. And this is what the error message looks like. BMS temp low, code 210. So this error code can be caused by for good reason. Your battery is cold, hence your battery can't charge or discharge and effectively goes into hibernation until it warms up. In severe cases, some customers may have to turn the battery off and back on again, but most of the time when it warms up, the battery bursts back into life. So I'm saying all this this is the happy path, why this error code exists and how it should operate. But I was called out, as you can see, on the 12th, just a couple of days ago, and that's when the ambient temperatures are well over 15 degrees. We've had some afternoons over 20 Celsius here in the southwest of the UK. So it didn't make a lot of sense why I had a battery or a system that was reporting a BMS temperature low. So I was able to look in the diagnostic data and I saw a whole bunch of things. So let me show you what this looks like. So I could see everything from BMS temperature sensor fault, temperature low. There were also some voltage faults in there as well, but I think those were just erroneous. So clearly there is something going on with this BMS and the temperature sensor, I thought. So attended site, got the error message. Let me just bring up the picture that it looks like on the BMS, because that's a pretty good. So this is what the BMS looks like. You'll have, talking about the HV 2600s now, depending on the battery model, there may be a slightly different sequence of lights, but on the older battery sequence, you can see a left red alarm light and the second state of charge light was flashing. So I looked in the handbook, that told me the same thing. It was the BMS temperature low message, also backed up by the error messages that I saw on the customer app and in the installer side, being able to see that there was a temperature fault. So what I did was I replaced the BMS, and that's the top unit on your battery stack. I keep stock of a number of parts. A BMS is something that I keep stock of. Swapped out the BMS, reconfigured the dip switches for the number of batteries, only to be met with the same error message about the BMS temperature low. And then I was able to use Home Assistant to probe each of the batteries and the battery low temperature, and that's what this looks like. So we can actually see that it was way back on the 11th of March that the BMS, one of the sensors in the battery stack has gone faulty, or the BMS had gone faulty. I was looking at the BMS cell temperature low, which led me towards thinking this wasn't actually a BMS temperature sensor, but a battery pack temperature sensor. So it'd been offline for all this time. I'm not quite sure why, nearly 3-4 weeks later, it decided that now was the time that this is going to cause the system to enter a standby fault mode. And you can see towards the end, the temperature returned to normal. That's after I'd successfully resolved the fault. So what did I find? What was the fault? I used a long cable pack to build of a stack of 7 batteries. I used the long cable pack to make a small battery stack of just the BMS and 2 batteries, and it worked. And then I added a third and a fourth and kept incrementing and trying to find when the fault would be reintroduced. And there was one particular battery module that as soon as I connected it and tried to utilize it, I got this error code about BMS temperature low. Through process of elimination, was able to prove that this battery is the one that has the fault. If I use any other combination of batteries, it works fine. But this battery, when in series in the stack, whether it's a stack of 2 or a stack of 7, this battery would drag the whole system down. In the Fox Cloud application, installers have access under the settings to see battery temperature. Lo and behold, I could see that I think it's described as M1 cell and M2 cell were reading -20. The rest of them all had temperatures in the 15 to 16 Celsius range. So I was confident that the battery module that I had identified at the top of the stack was registering itself as M1 and M2 cell temperatures, and that the temperature sensor had failed, and that somehow between it reading -20 and the others reading 15, and the BMS obviously has its own temperature sensor, I've obviously breached some kind of temperature delta rule within the BMS firmware, causing the batteries to enter that sort of suspended state. So the good news is I was able to bypass the faulty battery module and restore the customer's batteries working, just one battery down, whilst I carry out the RMA repair or replacement with Fox. But yeah, I just wanted to record a video, one to explain that this fault is normal and can happen, and we see it pop up quite a lot as we go through winter in the UK, especially vulnerable for batteries that don't have heaters or are exposed in outdoors or outbuilding type of environments where there's no heating. So that error message has its legitimate use cases, but not during spring in the UK and not only on one battery. And I think the system knew that there was something going on. It's a shame I couldn't just tell it to ignore and bypass, because it knows that there's a temperature sensor fault. It would be nice if it could tell me as an installer which battery pack, the serial number of the actual battery that's registering the fault. What it was giving me was the serial of the BMS, and it was calling it a BMS temperature fault, and it wasn't a BMS. So I'm going to leave the new BMS on the customer site anyway, just because why not? I've taken the effort of installing it. The BMS is not the problem. It turned out to be the battery pack. So this is probably, I think this is only the second hardware failure I've seen in over 5 years. Another one was, I think, more of a manufacturing fault that caused the electronics to be dead on arrival, and then this, which is, after years of being installed. I think this battery, it's a version C, so that would be 2020, 2019, maybe 21. It's an older battery. One of the first ones that was released into the UK was the version C of the version 1. You don't see many of them around anymore. So yeah, won't ramble anymore. That is the story of this BMS temperature error along with what a BMS temperature sensor fault could be, and it not being necessarily the BMS. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I'll post an update as to the aftercare experience of doing an RMA on a proven fault. Can't imagine it'll be anything but seamless. Get a new repair or replacement, get that installed into the customer's site, and they can then carry on again. Anyway, thank you. Bye for now.